November 14th, 1854. The rolling hills of County Meath, Ireland. When the groundskeeper arrived at Summerhill Estate that frost-laden morning, he found Captain Edmund Blackwood face down in the kennels. The Master of Hounds lay motionless among his own pack. 47 foxhounds surrounded their master's body. None were feeding, none were howling. They simply sat in perfect silence, staring at what remained of the man who had commanded them for 12 years. The pack's behavior troubled the groundskeeper more than the death itself. In his 40 years of service, he had never seen hounds refuse their master's commands. Yet witnesses from the previous day's hunt claimed that as Captain Blackwood lay dying in the field, bleeding from a fall that should not have been fatal, every single hound had turned away from him. They had walked, in formation, back to the kennels. They had not looked back once. The local constabulary ruled it a tragic riding accident. The Irish gentry mourned the loss of one of their finest sportsmen. The hunt season continued without interruption, but the truth was far more terrifying. Before we uncover the truth about Captain Edmund Blackwood and the Meath Foxhound Hunt of 1854, make sure to subscribe to the Silent Abbey and ring that notification bell. We dive deep into history's darkest corners to bring you true stories that have been buried by time. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our community of mystery seekers scattered across the globe. Now, let's step back into the winter of 1854, when the Irish countryside held secrets that would shake the aristocracy to its foundations. The Ireland of 1854 existed in the shadow of the Great Famine. Though the worst of Engordamore had passed, the country remained fractured. Over 1 million had starved. Another million had fled across the Atlantic. The survivors nursed wounds that would never fully heal. The land itself seemed cursed, and whispers of retribution against the Anglo-Irish landlord class echoed through every parish and crossroad. County Meath, however, remained an island of privilege. Here, the Anglo-Irish Protestant ascendancy maintained their estates with iron determination. The fox hunt continued as it had for generations, a display of power, tradition, and the natural order as the ruling class understood it. To abandon the hunt would have been to admit defeat, to show weakness. Summerhill Estate sprawled across 3,000 acres of prime Irish countryside. Captain Edmund Blackwood had inherited it from his father in 1842, just as famine tightened its grip on Ireland, where Catholic tenant farmers struggled to pay rent on land that produced only blighted potatoes. Blackwood expanded his kennels. He invested in breeding programs. He imported English foxhounds with impeccable lineage. He transformed the Meath hunt into one of the most prestigious in Ireland. His neighbors considered him a gentleman of the highest order. 42 years old, unmarried, devoted entirely to his hounds and his land. He rode every morning at dawn. He personally oversaw the training of each dog. He kept meticulous records in leather-bound journals, breeding lines, hunting statistics, the performance of individual hounds on specific terrain. Captain Blackwood knows each hound by name, by temperament, by the pitch of its voice and full cry, wrote Lord Ashford in a letter dated March 1853. He speaks to them as though they were his children. I have never witnessed such a bond between master and pack. The kennels at Summerhill were architectural marvels. Stone buildings with slate roofs, heated in winter, cleaned twice daily. Each hound had its name carved above its stall. Blackwood employed 4 full-time kennelmen, an extravagance that raised eyebrows even among his peers. But the results spoke for themselves. His pack could follow a scent across water. They could maintain formation across 6 miles of broken country. They never fought among themselves. Something else set them apart, though locals were reluctant to speak of it openly. The hounds were too obedient, too silent. They moved with mechanical precision that seemed unnatural for animals driven by instinct and bloodlust. When Blackwood gave a command, every hound responded in perfect unison. Not a heartbeat of delay, not a single animal breaking from the pack. It was like watching soldiers, recalled Thomas Brennan, a stable hand who worked briefly at Summerhill in 1853. Not dogs at all, they never played, never fought over scraps, just waited for orders. The other lads used to joke about it, but after dark, nobody joked. We all felt it, something wrong in those kennels. Brennan lasted only 3 months before requesting reassignment to the stables. He refused to elaborate on his reasons, but other kennel workers reported similar unease. The turnover rate for kennel staff at Summerhill was extraordinary. Most men left within 6 months. Captain Blackwood seemed unbothered by this pattern. He preferred to work alone with his hounds anyway. The hunting season of 1854 began with a traditional blessing on November 1st, All Saints' Day. Father Morrison, the Protestant rector, performed the ceremony before a gathering of Anglo-Irish gentry. Captain Blackwood's pack sat in perfect rows, 47 hounds arranged by height and coloring. They did not move during the 20-minute blessing. They did not pant despite the pressure of their collars. They simply stared ahead with what Father Morrison would later describe as a uniformity of expression that chilled me to my bones. But the blessing proceeded. The season opened. The first 3 hunts unfolded without incident. Captain Blackwood rode at the head of his pack, resplendent in his scarlet coat and black cap. The hounds performed flawlessly. The gentry applauded. Everything appeared normal. Everything appeared as it should be. The first incident occurred on November 8th, 6 days before Captain Blackwood's death. The hunt had pursued a fox across the Blackwater River Valley. The scent led through dense woodland toward the tenant farms on the southern border of the estate. As the pack approached a small cottage, they suddenly stopped. All 47 hounds froze mid-stride. Captain Blackwood shouted commands. He blew his horn. The hounds did not move. Inside the cottage, a tenant farmer named Seamus O'Malley lay dying of consumption. His wife and 3 children kept vigil. When the hounds appeared outside their door, motionless, silent, staring at the cottage, Mrs. O'Malley later testified that she felt certain death had come to claim her husband in a new and terrible form. They weren't looking at the cottage, she told the constable during the investigation. They were looking through it, through the walls, directly. Seamus in his bed. My youngest started screaming. The hounds didn't even turn their heads, just kept staring. Then, all at once, they turned around, walked away. Captain Blackwood was shouting at them. Red in the face, they paid him no mind whatsoever. Seamus O'Malley died that night. Captain Blackwood returned to Summerhill in a fury. Witnesses reported hearing him shouting in the kennels well past midnight. The next morning, 3 hounds were missing from the pack. Blackwood offered no explanation. The kennel staff were forbidden from discussing it. The second incident followed 5 days later, on November 13th. During an afternoon hunt, the pack pursued their quarry into a churchyard, St. Patrick's, a small Catholic church that served the local Irish population. The fox disappeared among the gravestones. The hounds followed. But when they reached a particular grave marker, they stopped again. This time, they began to dig. Captain Blackwood rode into the churchyard and demanded they cease immediately. The hounds ignored him. They dug with mechanical precision, all 44 remaining hounds working in shifts. Within 20 minutes they had excavated 3 feet of earth. Father Brennan, the Catholic priest, arrived to find the horrifying scene. Captain Blackwood was beating them with his crop, he recounted in his parish records, striking them hard enough to break bone. They did not yelp. They did not stop digging. They showed no reaction to the pain whatsoever. It was as though they were possessed by a single will that superseded all physical sensation. What the hounds uncovered sent Father Brennan running for the constabulary. The grave belonged to Colleen McCarthy, a 16-year-old girl who had died 3 months earlier. The official cause of death was listed as drowning, but the body the hounds revealed showed signs of violence that had not been noted in any official report. Bruising around the neck, broken fingers, evidence of restraint. The grave was quickly covered. Captain Blackwood claimed the hounds had simply been following a fox that had burrowed into the soft earth. Local authorities accepted this explanation with suspicious haste. The matter was declared closed. But Father Brennan made his own inquiries. He discovered that Colleen McCarthy had worked briefly at Summerhill Estate. She had been a kitchen maid for less than 2 months before requesting release from her position. She had returned to her family's cottage pale and shaken, refusing to explain what had happened. 6 weeks later, she was dead. Father Brennan brought his concerns to the local magistrate, Sir William Pettigrew. Sir William was Captain Blackwood's hunting partner and close friend. The priest's concerns were noted and filed away. No further investigation was opened. The third incident was witnessed by multiple members of the gentry and could not be easily dismissed. On the morning of November 14th, Captain Blackwood hosted a formal hunt breakfast at Summerhill Estate. 23 guests attended, the cream of Meath society. After the meal, as the party prepared to mount for the day's hunt, something extraordinary occurred. The hounds were released from the kennels as usual, but instead of assembling before their master, they walked directly to Lady Catherine Ashford. She stood near the mounting block, adjusting her riding gloves. The entire pack surrounded her. They did not growl, they did not bark. They simply formed a perfect circle around her and sat. Lady Ashford laughed nervously. "Captain Blackwood, your hounds seem to have chosen a new master." Captain Blackwood's face drained of color. He approached the circle, calling commands. The hounds did not acknowledge him. He raised his whip. The hounds remained motionless, their attention fixed on Lady Ashford. "Call them off," Lord Ashford demanded. "This is most irregular." "They won't. They're not." Captain Blackwood's composure shattered. He grabbed his lead hound Cromwell by the collar and dragged him away from the circle. Cromwell's head turned to maintain eye contact with Lady Ashford, his body moving against his will, his legs stiff. The moment Cromwell was pulled from the formation, Lady Ashford collapsed. She fell as though struck by an invisible force. The hounds immediately dispersed, returning to their master's side as if nothing had occurred. Lady Ashford revived within seconds, confused and shaken. She insisted she was fine. The hunt proceeded. But multiple witnesses later testified to what they had seen in that moment of collapse. Lady Ashford's eyes had rolled back, revealing only whites. Her mouth had opened, and a sound had emerged, not a scream, but something else. Multiple guests described it as voices, plural, speaking in unison, begging for help in Irish Gaelic. The hunt departed Summerhill Estate at 10:47 a.m., 44 hounds, 23 mounted riders, Captain Edmund Blackwood in the lead. By noon the captain would be dead, and the truth would begin to surface like a corpse from deep water. If this story is giving you chills, hit that like button. It helps us breathe. A more forgotten history to light. Share this with someone who loves dark mysteries and real historical horror. Let's discover what happens next in those fatal minutes on the hunting field. The fox ran east across Blackwood's own land. The pack followed with their characteristic precision. The hunting party rode behind, exhilarated by the crisp November air and the perfect scenting conditions. Everything proceeded normally for the first hour. At approximately 11:43 a.m., the fox led the chase toward a ravine that marked the boundary between Blackwood's estate and the neighboring Kilcarn property. The terrain here was treacherous, steep slopes, hidden rabbit warrens, loose stone concealed by long grass. Experienced riders knew to proceed carefully. Captain Blackwood did not slow down. Multiple witnesses reported that he seemed to be racing ahead of his own pack, which was extraordinary. The Master of Hounds traditionally follows the pack, reading their behavior, calling them on or stopping them as needed. But Blackwood spurred his horse forward, opening a gap between himself and the hounds. He was riding like a man possessed, testified Colonel Marcus Webb. I called out to him to mind the ground, but he didn't respond. His posture was all wrong, rigid in the saddle, leaning too far forward. For a horseman of his caliber, it was bizarre. At 11:47 a.m., Captain Blackwood's horse stumbled. The horse, a reliable Irish hunter named Admiral that Blackwood had ridden for 5 years, stepped into what appeared to be a rabbit hole. The animal's front leg collapsed. Blackwood was thrown forward over the horse's head. The fall should not have been fatal. Blackwood was an experienced rider. He knew how to fall. He rolled as he hit the ground, a textbook dismount from an unexpected throw. He landed in soft grass. His neck was not broken. His back was not injured. But he did not stand up. Lord Ashford reached him first. Edmund lay on his side, curled almost into a fetal position. His eyes were open. He was conscious. But he was trembling violently, and when I called his name, he did not respond. He stared past me at something I could not see. The hounds arrived seconds later. They did not approach their fallen master. Instead, they formed that same perfect circle they had created around Lady Ashford just hours earlier. 44 hounds sitting in geometric precision surrounding Captain Blackwood at a distance of exactly 10 feet. Lord Ashford attempted to cross the circle to aid his friend. The moment he stepped between two of the seated hounds, he reported feeling overwhelming nausea and a sensation he described as the weight of judgment. He staggered backward. Colonel Webb tried next with the same result. Lady Catherine Ashford, who had insisted on continuing with the hunt despite her earlier collapse, attempted to approach on foot. She made it 3 steps into the circle before she fell to her knees, vomiting. I heard them again, she would later testify. The voices, dozens of them, all young women, all speaking at once. They were saying numbers. 19, 21, 16, 23. Over and over, numbers and names. Colleen, Bridget, Maeve, Siobhan. His body arched backward with enough force to lift him briefly from the ground. His mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Blood began to seep from his nose, his ears, his tear ducts. The hunting party watched, paralyzed by a horror they could not comprehend. Several riders later admitted to a profound sense of rightness, as though they were witnessing not a tragedy but an execution, a deserved execution. At 11:53 a.m., Captain Edmund Blackwood stopped moving. The hounds stood as one. They turned away from their former master and began walking back toward Summerhill Estate. They did not run. They did not look back. They moved in perfect formation, their steps synchronized. Dr. James Whitmore, riding with the hunt, finally managed to approach. The body. His preliminary examination revealed no immediately apparent cause of death. No broken bones, no significant external injuries beyond minor abrasions from the fall. His heart had simply stopped. But his face... Dr. Whitmore paused in his testimony. His face was frozen in an expression of abject terror. In 30 years of medical practice, I have never seen such fear captured in death. The hunting party carried Captain Blackwood's body back to Summerhill Estate. They arrived at the manor house to find the kennels already in chaos. The hounds had returned ahead of them and locked themselves inside. The kennel staff reported that the animals had used their collective weight to slam the gates shut, trapping themselves inside with such force that the iron latches had bent. By nightfall, the local constabulary had arrived. By dawn, they would discover the truth that had been hidden beneath Summerhill Estate for over a decade. The groundskeeper found the body the next morning because the hounds had begun to howl. For the first time in anyone's memory, they made noise. All 44 of them, howling in perfect harmony, a sound that echoed across the hills and brought workers running from every corner of the estate. They found Captain Blackwood's corpse arranged in the center of the kennel floor. The hounds had dragged him from where the staff had temporarily placed him in the stable. They had positioned him on his back, arms spread, in an unmistakable posture of crucifixion, and around his body they had arranged objects. 44 objects, small, personal, bone-white in the dawn light. Human finger bones, each one carefully cleaned, clearly preserved, displayed like trophies. The constabulary searched the kennels. They searched the manor house. And in Captain Edmund Blackwood's private study, locked in a cabinet hidden behind a false bookshelf, they found his journals. 23 volumes, meticulously detailed, completely damning. The investigation that followed would shake Irish society to its foundations and expose the rot at the heart of Anglo-Irish privilege in post-famine Ireland. Chief Constable Robert Morrison took personal charge of the case. What he uncovered over the following weeks painted a portrait of systematic predation that had operated with impunity for more than 12 years. Captain Blackwood's journals documented 44 murders. The entries began in 1842, the year Blackwood inherited Summerhill Estate. They were written in the same meticulous hand he used for breeding records and hunting statistics. Each entry included a name, an age, a date, and a detailed description of the crime. Blackwood had not merely documented his actions, he had analyzed them with the detached precision of a natural scientist conducting experiments. Subject 17, Bridget O'Connor, age 19, employed in kitchen duties for 4 weeks, showed appropriate fear response when isolated in eastern kennels, resistance minimal, disposal in north woodlands, depth 6 feet. Hounds showed significant interest during process. Consider increasing their presence during future activities. The language was clinical, inhuman. Blackwood had not viewed his victims as people but as subjects in an ongoing study. And that study, the journals revealed, had focused on a disturbing thesis: the supernatural capabilities of animals to sense and respond to human evil. Blackwood had believed, or convinced himself, that foxhounds possessed a unique sensitivity to guilt and wickedness. He theorized that exposing them repeatedly to his crimes would create a pack capable of hunting human quarry with the same precision they brought to fox hunting. He documented changes in their behavior, their obedience, their growing silence. The pack no longer exhibits individual personality, he wrote in 1847. They move as extensions of a single will, my will. The process has exceeded all expectations. They do not judge me, they serve me. They understand that we are bonded by shared knowledge of death. But Blackwood had been wrong, catastrophically wrong. The hounds had not become extensions of his will. They had become vessels for something else entirely. Dr. Alistair Pemberton, a scholar of animal behavior from Trinity College, Dublin, examined the hounds in the days following Blackwood's death. His report, submitted to the constabulary and later sealed by court order, described phenomena that defied scientific explanation. The animals exhibit no signs of individual consciousness. They respond to stimuli in perfect unison, without any observable communication between pack members. More disturbing, they appear to be acting with purpose that suggests intelligence far exceeding canine capacity. When I separated one hound from the pack, it became immediately agitated, not in the manner of a distressed dog, but with the specific urgency of a human, unable to complete an important task. Dr. Pemberton's most unsettling observation involved the hound's reaction to the names of Blackwood's victims. When researchers read the names aloud from the journals, specific hounds would approach. Each hound seemed to correspond to a specific victim. When that victim's name was spoken, that hound would become animated, pacing, whining, attempting to communicate. It was as though each hound carried within it the spirit of a murdered girl. Pemberton wrote, "I am aware how this sounds. I am a man of science, but I cannot explain what I witnessed through any framework of natural law." The physical evidence supported the journal entries with horrifying precision. Excavations across Summerhill Estate uncovered 43 bodies. The victims ranged in age from 15 to 23. All were Catholic Irish women. All had worked briefly at the estate before disappearing. All had been reported missing, but their cases had been dismissed by authorities with minimal investigation. Margaret Kelly's mother had been told her daughter had run off to Dublin. Siobhan Murphy's family was informed she had emigrated to America. Maeve O'Brien had supposedly drowned in the Blackwater River, an explanation accepted without a body ever being recovered. The pattern was unmistakable. Young Irish Catholic women from tenant families had been disappearing from Summerhill Estate for over a decade. Not one investigation had been pursued with any vigor. Not one Protestant landowner had been seriously questioned. The Anglo-Irish establishment had protected its own, consciously or not, creating the conditions for Blackwood's predation. Father Brennan, the Catholic priest who had first raised concerns, brought damning testimony to the inquest. He produced records showing that he had reported suspicious circumstances surrounding 3 deaths to local authorities between 1850 and 1854. Each report had been filed and forgotten. I was told repeatedly that tenant families were prone to exaggeration, Father Brennan testified, that Catholic girls often ran away from employment rather than work honestly, that I was stirring up sectarian trouble by making accusations against a respected member of the ascendancy. I was made to understand that pursuing these matters would not be in my best interest. The inquest revealed a network of complicity, not necessarily in Blackwood's crimes themselves, but in the social structures that enabled them. Magistrates who accepted his explanations without investigation, coroners who ruled deaths accidental without examining bodies, constables who discouraged Catholic families from filing reports, an entire system designed to protect the privilege of men like Captain Edmund Blackwood while rendering women like Colleen McCarthy invisible. The legal proceedings were complicated by Blackwood's death. There would be no criminal trial. But the civil suits brought by victims' families forced uncomfortable questions into public discourse. Seamus O'Reilly, representing 7 families, argued that Summerhill Estate should be forfeited to compensate victims. Captain Blackwood used his position, his wealth, and his status as a Protestant gentleman to prey upon Catholic women with impunity. He was enabled by a legal system that values English land rights over Irish lives. That system must answer for its complicity. The courts disagreed. In a ruling that generated outrage in the Catholic community, Judge Henry Blackstone declared that Summerhill Estate would pass to Blackwood's cousin, Michael Blackwood, who lived in England and had never visited Ireland. The estate could not be held liable for the criminal actions of its owner when said owner was deceased. Compensation for victims' families was set at £20 per victim, barely enough to cover burial costs. The funds would come not from the estate but from a general relief fund, spreading the cost across taxpayers and ensuring that Summerhill property remained intact. The hounds presented their own legal and practical challenge. Who owned them? What should be done with animals implicated so profoundly in murder? Dr. Pemberton argued for continued study. These animals represent a phenomenon we do not understand. They may provide insight into consciousness, animal cognition, and, he hesitated in his testimony, the possibility of survival after death. To destroy them would be to destroy potential evidence of realities beyond our current scientific framework. The Catholic community demanded the hounds be destroyed immediately. They are cursed creatures, declared Father Morrison, the Protestant rector who had blessed the pack weeks earlier. Vessels of divine judgment or demonic possession, I cannot say, but they should not continue to exist in this world. Families of the victims took a different position. They wanted the hounds protected. My daughter's spirit lives in one of those animals, testified Mrs. Mary Kelly, mother of Margaret Kelly. I have seen it with my own eyes. When they speak her name, one hound comes forward. That hound has her eyes, my daughter's eyes. I will not allow anyone to kill what remains of my child. The debate raged for weeks. Public sentiment was divided. Scientific curiosity battled against religious horror. Grief complicated every argument. The matter was resolved by the hounds themselves. On December 3, 1854, exactly 19 days after Captain Blackwood's death, the keeper arriving for morning duties found all 44 hounds dead in their kennels. They lay in a perfect circle, heads toward the center, as though they had arranged themselves deliberately. No signs of violence, no indication of poison. Dr. Whitmore's examination concluded that their hearts had simply stopped, all at the same moment, sometime in the early hours of the morning. It was as though they had completed a task, the keeper testified, and having completed it, they had no further purpose. The hounds were buried in unconsecrated ground at the edge of Summerhill Estate. No marker was placed. Within 5 years, locals had forgotten the exact location. But the story did not end there. The Meath Foxhound Hunt tragedy forced uncomfortable questions into public discourse and created ripples that extended far beyond County Meath. The case became a rallying point for critics of Anglo-Irish rule. Daniel O'Connell's Repeal Association, though weakened after his death in 1847, seized upon the Blackwood case as evidence of systemic injustice. Pamphlets circulated throughout Ireland documenting how 44 murders had occurred while authorities turned a blind eye. Captain Blackwood did not act alone, wrote journalist Michael Doheny in the Nation newspaper. He was aided by every magistrate who dismissed Catholic concerns as superstition, by every coroner who ruled accidental what was clearly murder, by every gentleman who valued property rights over human life. The real horror is not one monster with hounds, but an entire system that enabled his hunting of Irish women. The scandal contributed to growing calls for land reform and tenant rights. While the Meath case did not directly change laws, it entered the repertoire of grievances that would eventually drive the land war of the 1870s and 1880s. More immediately, the case prompted reforms in how missing persons cases were handled. The Irish Constabulary, stung by criticism, instituted new protocols requiring investigation of all disappearances regardless of the social class of the victim or the accused. The reforms were limited and imperfectly enforced, but they represented acknowledgement that the previous system had failed catastrophically. The psychological and supernatural elements of the case attracted attention from emerging fields of inquiry. The Society for Psychical Research, founded in 1882, would later investigate the Meath hounds as one of its early case studies. Members interviewed surviving witnesses and examined court records, searching for evidence of genuine paranormal phenomena. Their conclusions were cautious but intriguing. "We cannot prove survival of consciousness after death," the Society's report stated. But the behavior of the hounds, attested by multiple credible witnesses, suggests communication or influence by agencies unknown to current science. Whether these agencies were the spirits of murdered women, some form of collective animal consciousness, or phenomena yet to be understood, remains an open question. The case entered folklore quickly. Within a decade, Irish storytellers were sharing variations of the tale in which the hounds were cast as agents of divine justice, delivering punishment where human law had failed. The story appealed to a population that had witnessed systemic injustice and yearned for cosmic balance. But folklore smoothed away uncomfortable truths. It transformed the victims into a collective rather than 44 individual women with names, families, and interrupted lives. It made Captain Blackwood a monster, which he was. But in doing so, it allowed society to externalize the evil, to pretend he was an aberration rather than a product of specific social conditions. The truth was more complex and more damning. Blackwood had been enabled by privilege, protected by class solidarity, and emboldened by a legal system that valued certain lives over others. His crimes were extraordinary, but the mechanisms that allowed them were ordinary features of 19th-century Anglo-Irish society. Similar cases emerged in the following years, suggesting Blackwood was not unique. In 1857, Lord James Caulfield of County Cork was found to have maintained a private dungeon where tenant women were imprisoned. In 1863, the disappearance of multiple women from the Wicklow estate of Sir Richard Moore led to scandal and a sudden departure for Australia. None of these cases generated the attention of the Meath hounds, perhaps because they lacked the supernatural elements that had captured public imagination. The supernatural elements continued to haunt Summerhill Estate long after the principals were dead. The property passed through several owners, none keeping it for more than a few years. Workers reported hearing women's voices in the abandoned kennels, hounds that did not exist barking in formation. Apparitions of Captain Blackwood riding across the fields pursued by spectral hounds. By 1920, the manor house stood empty. During the Irish War of Independence, it was burned by the IRA as a symbol of Anglo-Irish oppression. The ruins remained until the 1960s when they were finally demolished. A housing estate occupies the land now. Residents occasionally report strange occurrences, dogs refusing to walk certain paths, children claiming to hear women singing in the woods, unexplained cold spots in houses built where the kennels once stood. The case raises questions about the nature of justice that remain relevant. When human institutions fail to protect the vulnerable, what forces emerge to restore balance? The MEA. Towns appeared to deliver a form of justice. Blackwood died in terror, his crimes exposed, his reputation destroyed. But that justice came too late for 44 women. It came only after the system had failed them completely, and it came through mechanisms we cannot fully explain or control. The story asks us to consider whether we believe in cosmic justice, in the universe's capacity to correct human wrongs through channels outside law and reason. It asks whether we're comfortable with that idea, with the notion that justice might arrive wearing shapes we don't recognize, operating through logic we can't comprehend. Perhaps most unsettling, the case forces us to confront what creates monsters like Captain Edmund Blackwood. Not supernatural evil, not demon possession, but social structures that grant certain people power over others, legal systems that protect privilege over justice, and communities that choose comfort over uncomfortable truths. The hounds may have been the instruments of Blackwood's downfall, but the real horror was always human. The horror of a society that allowed one man to murder 44 women before anyone with power chose to see what was happening in those kennels. That horror is not supernatural. It does not require belief in spirits or cosmic justice. It requires only honest examination of how systems of power operate, who they protect, and who they abandon. And that makes it far more terrifying than any ghost. What do you think drove the hounds to that final act of judgment? Were they truly vessels for the spirits of murdered women, or does this case reveal something else about the nature of consciousness, justice, and the boundaries between human and animal awareness? Leave your theories in the comments below. Do you believe in supernatural justice, or can this entire case be explained through psychological trauma and symbolic interpretation? Our community loves debating these gray areas where history meets the unexplainable. If you found this story as haunting as we did, make sure you're subscribed to The Silent Abbey. We dig into forgotten chapters of history every week, bringing you true stories that reveal uncomfortable truths about human nature and the societies we build. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next investigation. We're exploring another case from Victorian Ireland next week, one that involves a hedge school, a missing teacher, and a mass confession that horrified an entire parish. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for keeping these forgotten voices alive through your attention. These stories matter. These lives mattered. See you in the next video.